This is Dr. Tami Dean, and you are listening to the Equity Hour podcast. I am so excited to be here with you today. My goal is that as a listener, you leave with new ideas, resources, and actionable steps for your educational community. Let's explore how we can use our voices for equity and social justice today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Equity Hour with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. I am so excited to again be coming to you over the airwaves to chat about all things diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social justice and education. And today, I just really wanted to talk about a few things that just keep coming up over and over in various spaces in my worlds, and just throwing out some things that are on my mind today. So apologies if I end up rambling or going on a tangent, but actually, those bird walks end up usually being some of the most moments of insight, best moments of insight as humans, right? So we'll see where this takes us. So I want to talk today because I was recently on LinkedIn and, well, I've been on a lot of spaces, but there's so much talk around the science of reading, around reading comprehension, fluency of reading. A few episodes back, I had Dr. Katrina Lennon on, and we talked about the challenges that teacher ed programs are facing because we've swung the pendulum so far in one direction. And I say all this amongst and in the midst of quote unquote testing season. And I want to talk about testing season, first of all. Like, why is this even a thing? Is what just burns in my mind all the time. Because I really, in my core, just think it is not what is best for students. It is not what is best for educators. And does this really provide us with the information that we need? Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that assessment is bad. Assessment is a tool to inform us around learning that has taken place, right? So there's learning, there's assessment of learning, there's assessment for learning, and there's assessment as learning, right? So there are three different components of assessment. But what has happened over the trajectory of my career is this huge shift towards assessment and testing meaning only one thing. And really, it's that quantitative measure in this one day, one snapshot of one moment. And I don't know about y'all, but if I'm having a bad day, that's probably not the best day for me to take this assessment. And is it really an accurate portrayal of what I know and am able to do? Because these assessments are really only assessing one type of learning, right? And in order to try to quote unquote do well on these assessments, we've created these systems where there's almost more assessment than there is instruction. Because if you're always assessing, when is the actual learning taking place? And it's closed the doors for so many students on opportunities to engage and think critically and have meaningful and engaging learning opportunities. And for me, the irony of this is these engaging learning opportunities actually better prepare you to do lower level thinking, like in the assessment. And I can tell you, as a former professor, I could tell students that when they started to come into my college classes that had been a part of the No Child Left Behind era and when that started. And I remember it distinctly as a teacher, right? We would have like a TEPS prep Wednesday, which I always thought was the most asinine idea ever, because if I'm teaching well and providing students opportunities to learn, they are by the very nature preparing for engaging and thinking critically around the text. But what we've done is like built this almost scripted way of looking at and thinking about a piece of text or a problem or how to write, right? And, if you've ever read or listened to Kelly Gallagher talk about writing, right? The 5-paragraph essay just really doesn't exist naturally out in the world. And he talks about this, and it's true because it doesn't, because writing takes all these different forms. And so I want to focus a little bit on reading because there's just this misunderstanding around reading and students' potential challenges to become a proficient, fluid reader. And one of the things that I've seen shift is we've moved away from actual reading, right? And where students are spending maybe 5 minutes, or they're only looking at a short passage or an excerpt because that's what they see on the test. Or we're breaking down words or the writing process so much that we interrupt the flow of ideas. And so if we go back to what is at the heart, right? What is at the heart of reading and writing? It's communication. So reading is about receiving and understanding communication, and writing is about communicating with others, right? It is not about the perfection of that process. And I'm not saying students don't need to learn those things, but what I'm saying is we're getting in the way of the creativity and the interest and the joy and the reciprocity of reading and writing. Because if I'm only ever looking at a short passage, I never get into the flow of reading. I never get to decide what is joyful about reading. If I'm always taking the teacher's tool, which is a text level, and I'm always asking or forcing students to choose books around a text level versus just choosing text for the sake of wanting to look at a text, then I'm interrupting the joy and autonomy and even their ability to feel confident in choosing a text. Because I can tell you what, most of you probably, if you picked up, I don't even know, pick something that you're not great at, right? And you picked up a book to look at it. So like if I picked up an inorganic chemistry book and tried to read about it, or even honestly, my son is studying aerospace engineering. Some of the things he talks about, I have no idea what he's talking about. I am a very smart person. I read, I study, I have multiple degrees. I don't know what he's talking about because I have not spent time in that area. But I know that I need to use a different skill set when I'm grabbing a text that is more challenging for me. Or I grab a book that is not something that's interesting to me. So I know what genre I like. I'm just curious how many students are really getting the opportunity to know what they might actually like to read. Because are we actually giving them the opportunity to read? Like read, not a passage, not a short book, not a print of an excerpt, right? But actually dive into reading and engaging with text. And I was just in a little LinkedIn chat today actually about this because I think this is where we're doing students a disservice. And this post was talking about students that may appear to have some challenges with reading comprehension or fluency, and people are like, oh, it's background knowledge. And this particular conversation was around curricular materials that are going to bring in that background knowledge. Okay, so yes, background knowledge is important, but part of how you also learn about the world is being able to engage with the world. So again, I go back to test prep tends to take us away from those authentic opportunities and learning moments to think critically, to dive deeper, to do projects, to do inquiry, right? And we miss out on those opportunities. And if you're thinking, like, what does that have to do with equity? This is all about equity, because the students that this happens to the most are disproportionately students of color, students in low SES environments, and just students that we perceive, and I put that in quotes, and if you want to hear more about this, go listen to my previous 2 episodes, right, that we perceive to be low-level learners that we interrupt all the time. So what we end up doing is doing some more skill and drill and kill, and they don't ever get to read. Right? Like, and that just makes me sad, because the only way in life to get better at something is to do it over and over and over and over, and with longevity and repetition. And if I'm not getting to have the opportunity to delve in and build stamina and try out different genres, how am I ever going to do that? That's like expecting someone who never practices basketball to be picked in the draft. Like, that's just not going to happen. In order to build that skill set, there are hours and hours of practice and engaging and learning, like, and correction and redirection and coaching. There is coaching. And I think this is one of the important pieces, right? If you rethink in your mind, or you don't even have to rethink, I want you to reflect. When you think about the purpose of learning, is it to deposit information into students to then regurgitate on an exam? Or is the purpose of teaching to facilitate questioning and engaging and then learning and exploring information and materials and building connections across those learnings? It's something to think about. Because if it's the latter, how are those practices engaged and reflected in the classroom? And you may be thinking, well, Dr. Tami, I don't really have a lot of choice in that, because I'm told that I have to teach in this way, or I have to read this script, or, my admin is saying this, or my district. And I think that takes us back to this bigger question of, how do we interrupt and interrogate systems of inequity? Because that's exactly what this is. And I wanted to just talk about this because I think people always think equity or systems of inequity are, again, like racially motivated. I've talked about this in previous episodes. And while there are underpinnings of bias around race and socioeconomic standing with some of these practices and policies, and where you see them and where you don't, it's a bigger crisis in education right now. Like, the fact that we call it testing season, and we have, like, it's a season, is it a good thing? I don't know. I really want to talk more about this. If you are interested in talking more about this, I want you to head on over to Instagram, shoot me a message, send me a DM, hit me up with a comment. Maybe we need to do like an Instagram live. I really just want to hear from educators thinking around this whole testing season component, because we are stressing students out over a day or two. We are stressing educators out over this. Like, and the lack of trust, like they can't do anything else. If you just go to TikTok, just go to Instagram, you can see all of these videos, which are hilarious and sad all at the same time, talking about what they do or don't get to do. Or, I have to walk constantly around the room. It's an equity issue too, because you know how distracting that is to have someone walking constantly? Like, that's nerve-wracking. I'm not even an anxious person typically. That would make me anxious. Like, I can't even tell you how grateful I am that I went to school before this testing mayhem. And yes, we did have standardized tests and norm reference tests. But it wasn't to the degree that it is now. And it wasn't constant. Like benchmarks and then looking at the benchmarks and then adjusting the data. And I am not saying data is bad. Data is great. But what kind of data and why are we collecting the data? And what are we doing with the data? That's my question. So I just really needed to talk about this whole test prep season and how it then correlates to skill and drill and how that, I think, just feeds the monster of not really getting the opportunity to read and enjoy reading. And, you know, this is an unpopular opinion, probably, but I don't think everyone has to learn to love to read. Not everyone is going to love to read. Just so, like, not everyone loves basketball or everyone loves golf or everyone loves science or history or any of those things. But I should be given the opportunity to discover that for myself in a way that engages authentically with real books and experiment with them. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. I am feeling all the feels for the students and educators as we move into this part of the school year. I mean, if we're having to share mental health resources with students and educators to quote unquote get through this time, I don't know what that says about it. Like, what do you think that says about it? I would love to hear more about that from you. So if you're interested, let me know. Hit me up. I'm going to probably do a little video on Instagram too about this just because it's sitting on my mind. Maybe we need to do an Instagram live and you can pop in and chat. So I'd love to hear from you. Good luck to all my educators. I am thinking of you. I would love us to think about, you know, how do we pull and use our voice to shift this current climate around testing and what we define as reading versus not reading. So that's my 2 cents for this week. Just on my mind. I'm thinking of you all. Would love to hear from you. And again, if you are interested in support with how to integrate some of the changes or ideas that I talk about on the podcast or share on my Instagram, please hit me up. I would love to take a few minutes and have a free consultation call with you to discuss how I can support you. And be on the lookout. I'm going to be having a virtual course option workshop coming up. So be on the lookout for that announcement. And so thank you so much again for joining me today for another episode of the Equity Hour. Again, if you're enjoying this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe and let your educator friends know about it. And if you are doing something in your classroom that you would like to share with others, hit me up. I'm always looking for guests. Until next time, remember, use your voice. This wraps up another episode of the Equity Hour podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Make sure to check out the show notes for any resources, links, and next steps from today's episode. Head on over to Instagram and give us a follow at Dragonfly Rising LLC for more tips, resources, and opportunities to connect. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, intent is not enough. Action is necessary. How will you use your voice today?